Did you know that if honeybees went extinct, so would humans? Bees are pollinators and play a very important role in sustaining ecosystems. They support the growth of trees, flowers, and all sorts of different crops. Even though bees are responsible for $30 billion in crops a year, their hard work often goes unrecognized. Honeybees are known as a keystone species because they have large effects on their ecosystem and are essentially the backbone that hold the habitat together. Bees prefer to live in gardens, woodlands, and meadows. The bees in the audio clip are in an almond orchard. Believe it or not, almonds and bees have a mutually beneficial relationship. Mutualism is when there is an interaction between individuals of two different species where they both equally benefit from each other. Bees are essential to almond crops because they transport pollen from tree to tree, resulting in cross-pollination. Almond orchards help strengthen beehives by providing bees with all 10 amino acids their diets require, and they are the honeybee's first natural source of food every spring. Beehives will always leave almond orchards stronger compared to when they arrive because the nuts are very nutritious even for humans. A beehive on its own, it's like its own little ecosystem within an ecosystem. Honeybees depend strongly on each other for survival. Each bee has its own individual role in the colony. All male bees are drones, but female bees can be workers or queens of the hive. The queen bee is the only female in the entire colony who can reproduce. When she is in her larval stage, she is only fed royal jelly, which has an especially high sugar content, which is what is responsible for the size difference between drones, workers, and queen bees. This diet also gives the queen the ability to exude certain pheromones that suppress the worker bees' biological capabilities to lay eggs even though they are female. Worker bees begin their lives by taking care of larvae, functioning as a nurse bee. As they begin to grow older, they go through a housekeeping phase where they produce wax and nectar and pollen, and they regulate the hive's temperature. When worker bees approach the end of their 6-week lifespan, they become foragers, and their job is to collect resources from outside the hive, essentially providing water and pollen for the colony. This makes bees a eusocial species because they live in multi-generational functional groups. Non-breeding individuals like the nurse bees take care of the young, and the forager bees provide the population with resources, justifying that the honeybee species is a prime example of eusociality in ecosystems. On average, queen bees lay eggs every 20 seconds in the spring, reaching populations of 60,000 or more later in the year. They have no fecundity schedule. When the laying gets out of hand or when the hive is doing very well, a swarm will occur. The queen bee leaves the hive with half the bee population essentially splitting one hive into two, distributing the species. There are 3 types of species distribution: random, regular, and clumped. Bees disperse themselves in clumped patterns, resulting in individuals of the beehive colonizing in clustered groups to create a new hive and colony. This is a visual of the global dispersion of honeybees. The areas with the highest species richness are dry and temperate areas away from the poles. There are more bees in the northern hemisphere than in the southern, and far fewer individuals in forest biomes because trees provide fewer resources that bees need to survive compared to plants and flowers. Bees also greatly affect the plants they are pollinating. Cross-pollination is important when determining the gene flow and maintaining genetic variation of plant populations. Gene flow is the transfer of genetic information from one population to another, which increases the genetic diversity. Variation between populations is increasingly becoming more important in ecosystems where pollinator populations are decreasing, but cross-pollination has the ability to optimize population diversity. Bees have small hairs all over their bodies that attract pollen grains through electrostatic forces. The pollen rubs off the bee's body onto the stigma of another plant, resulting in cross-pollination. Genetic diversity is important to maintain because it is what allows natural selection to decrease or increase allele frequencies. When there's a greater variation, it is advantageous because it allows individuals with higher fitnesses to survive and reproduce, forming a fitter next generation. This is becoming a greater issue as bee populations continue to decrease. Survivorship curves are the graphs that measure the proportion of a species alive at a given age. There are 3 types. A type 1 survivorship curve means that there is a high probability of an organism surviving until later in life. A type 2 survivorship curve is when a population roughly maintains a constant mortality rate. And a type 3 survivorship curve means that very few individuals live to adulthood, with the majority of the population dying in the early life stages. The average bee population maintains a constant mortality rate, leading it to a type 2 survivorship curve. They are plotted as a diagonal line going downward, demonstrating that an individual's chance of dying is independent of their age. Bees use both R and K selected strategies, which explains the type 2 survivorship curve. R-selected species often produce many offspring but do not provide much care for their young. K-selected species provide a relatively small amount of offspring and provide prolonged care and protection. Bees produce large amounts of offspring, but the worker bees provide lots of parental care, selecting strategies for both the R and K selection. Honeybees are primary consumers that mainly occupy the second trophic level. As the honeybee population continues to decline, it will begin to influence the physical and chemical factors of an ecosystem through a process called bottom-up control. This is when changes in a lower trophic level population, like a primary consumer, directly affect the biomass of secondary and tertiary consumers. Without bees, not only will there be no pollination, but populations like birds and bears that eat bees will be negatively affected as well. With no pollination, all crops will begin to die and the human population will become scarce for resources. As a whole, we must bring different cultures and knowledges together to prevent extinction using a method called two-eyed seeing. This is a guiding principle that was created by Micmac elder Albert Marshall. It is to teach us to view the world with one eye through indigenous perspectives and one eye through Western perspectives, encouraging a beneficial outcome for all. Using this method will improve environmental sustainability. If more people who are well adapted to Western culture used both eyes to see, they would develop a greater spiritual connection with the environment around them and begin to show more respect for nature. Two-eyed seeing can decrease the use of pesticides, stop gross amounts of deforestation, and prevent habitat destruction of honeybees. Pollinators are crucial organisms of ecosystems, and this should be recognized more globally to increase their populations and maintain their genetic diversity.